Morning here. All right. Good morning. Some of you are in the 9 o'clock section, and not all of you are in the 10 o'clock. But welcome back. If you took a little break and maybe got some more coffee, I don't know. I'm trying to drink more water. It's supposed to be good for you. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about motherboards. We're kind of backtracking a little bit in the sense that we're ahead of this in some areas, and then there are some things I was hoping to talk about with motherboards. One of the assignments that I posted for you guys. Now, again, if you are in just if you're just in the software class, you're not in the hardware class. I think it's mostly vice versa. There might be a couple of you that are only in the CTS 115. Send me a message or an email, and this assignment that we're talking about, what I can do is give you like extra credit for it or something, because it's more related to hardware class, but the two do go together, and the two classes are designed to go together. I do have a few students that are taking the hardware class only that are actually in like the machining and the electronics program, but for the most part, if you're doing the CTS program, both classes are required. So anyway, long story short, if you're only in the software class, and I'll put this in the announcements too, and you want to do this assignment, you can do it as extra credit even. So what we're looking at is the idea, we're just kind of playing around with, which reminds me, I think I might have put I wonder if I put the price in there. That would have been good. Oh, we didn't. Yeah, we talked about pricing. So I'll add that to the announcement too. So under the assignment. So I think we talked about around $1,500, which is actually a fairly healthy budget for a computer that doesn't include the monitor. So you can add in the request that I posted up there. So I'll share this with you guys. And so here's the quote process. And like I said, this assignment is mostly just for fun. Some of you have already built your own computer and are pretty familiar with the concept of picking out the parts that go together. PC Part Picker is a good resource. If you want to kind of do it manually, the first thing you want to decide, which we talked about, was to pick out the CPU. With the budget of $1,500, you've got fairly good leeway there to pick out a decent CPU. And then as you start breaking down the prices, you'll kind of see, how that works. And if you go over a little bit, it's not the end of the world. I mean, this isn't really like, if you spent $5,000, you're kind of not really making too many theoretical choices, but around 1,500 is what we're shooting for. So, so this is the document that's posted online now. I will add a note to it that we were looking for a budget of around $1,500. So I added some stuff here. So this is kind of in a standard business format. You guys, when you reply back to this, so this is an RFQ, or request for quotation, which, by the way, if you were wanting to maybe think about doing a small business, I would not recommend building custom computers for people. I mean, it's fun for one person to do it if it's your own computer. But if you start thinking about the time that's involved, and I mentioned that in here too, that if the time that's involved, if you're giving yourself a wage, is going to add onto the price. So for us, we're looking at the quotation. When you reply back to it, you can use kind of a similar format. This is something that you guys should know how to do, and as well is to have how to type up a standard business letter. It's not an English class, but you should know how to format a document. Same thing with an email, writing an email that's kind of like a business type email. You want to use complete sentences. I know a lot of people get in the habit of messaging and sending texts and things like that. And an email is a little bit more formal document, or a letter, which is typically, it's not going to be printed out and mailed. You're going to email this to somebody. If you don't have access to a word processor like Microsoft Office, LibreOffice is a good one. I showed you guys Ninite last class period. Ninite.com, you can do LibreOffice or OpenOffice, and they're both free, and those are both good. So this one I actually typed up with, you can see at the top, LibreOffice Writer. It's got this toolbar across the top. Most word processors kind of look the same in terms of software. So those two are good. Google Docs is great. That way, if you're using Google Docs, it kind of saves it automatically all the time. and you don't have to worry about your computer crashing or whatever and your homework disappearing. So any of those are great solutions. I use LibreOffice. It'll save it when you go to File, Save As. The standard, the standard format is ODT, an open document, but you can save it as a doc file as well. So you can do, so if you're using OpenOffice and it's saving it as an open ODT, an open document file, you can do File, Save As, and tell it you want to save it as a .doc, which is very standardized document file. Okay, so here's my pretend company that I made up. That's not my real address. So it starts out, you've got the salutation here, to whom it may concern. If you guys have taken an English class, this is kind of your standard format for, there's templates out there, but you probably don't need a template. You can just, type this up, you can center this up here, left justify the rest of it. You've got the date on there. On yours, you might have a little short paragraph saying, dear Mr. Burns or so-and-so, here's the quotation that you requested. I hope this meets your needs, something to that effect. And then on yours as well, you will have these, instead of just saying processor, you'll say it's an Intel, i9900 or whatever happens to be. And then over on the right-hand side, you'll have a column of prices. Now, again, in the real world, if you were doing this, you wouldn't tell the customer how much each thing cost, right? You're going to tell them how much the whole thing costs at the end, and you'd be building in a margin of 10 or 15% profit to cover, to make something on this, right? And that's the problem, is that if you're doing this for a business, you're competing against Dell and some of these companies that are buying thousands of processors and thousands of sticks of RAM, whereas a single person, you can look for good deals coming up around Black Friday or whatever the deal is, but it's really hard to be competitive when you're only buying one video card compared to 1,000 or something like that. But even so, building your own computer, I think, does have some advantages. You guys that have done it, you get to pick out exactly what you want. Maybe you get the best video card that you can afford, if that's what you want to do with it is playing video games and stuff like that. And you're not usually adding up the amount of hours that you spend, because maybe you enjoy doing it. So if it's kind of a hobby or something like that, you don't have to figure out, well, gee, it took me 3 hours to do that. If I was paying myself $20 an hour or whatever, that kind of thing. So, so at any rate, on yours, you're going to have a left-hand side, you'll have the item here. And then over on the right-hand side, you could use right justify. You might have that this is, $455 or something like that. And then you would have a list of the prices going down the right-hand side, and then a grand total at the bottom to kind of give us an idea of what we're shooting for. And this should be fun. Don't make this like, some people get into it, and if maybe they're thinking about building their own computer. I've had students, spend a lot of time researching this, but then on the flip side, they were actually thinking of building their own computer, and some of them did. Some quarters you'll have students buying the parts and putting them together. I realize that that's cost prohibitive. Nobody's going to be buying, some of you might be in the market for your own computer or upgrading, and we'll talk about upgrading too, when that makes sense and when it doesn't make sense. But for this exercise, I'm going to kind of have a pretend scenario. We're building these computers. They should do multiple stuff, multimedia, 3D, and then also I put on there that they should be capable, the video card, and most of the decent video cards should be able to support this. But the Computer Club bought a VR headset a couple of years ago. It's an HTC Vive, and we actually had to buy a new video card because the old video card wouldn't support the frame rates and stuff that were required for this VR headset. So that's a good threshold, is to try to look up and do a little research and say, hey, I need a new video card. I want to be able to play video games, but maybe it also has to do, X, Y, and Z, outputting to 4K. That's pretty standardized these days. And then being able to support an HTC Vive, that might be a good option as well. Okay, processor, you guys get to pick AMD or Intel. That's either one is fine. Quad core at a minimum, that's pretty much a given. Although again, Intel and AMD kind of have different ways of describing their processors, with virtual cores versus actual real cores, stuff like that. Hard drive, You might even be able to go bigger. Some of these specs I recycled from last year, but at least a 250 gig solid state drive. And we're looking at, you can have a standard SATA style drive or this newer M.2 format, which a lot of the motherboards are coming in, and we'll look at some pictures of those as well. And then when we talk about hard drives, you'll have at least 2 hard drives inside. So you'll have the SSD, the SSD format, and then 2 other drives that'll be used for data storage. And those will be configured in RAID 1. So we'll talk about RAID configuration, but that's basically everything on drive A gets copied to drive B. So you've got a mirrored configuration. Sound card. Again, sound card is probably integrated into the motherboard. So we'll look at some motherboards today that support decent sound cards, stuff like that. Trenton's carrying us around at work here, so it's all right. It's all good. Wherever you guys have to do to tune in, that's great. All right, Wi-Fi is probably also, if you shop for these components, you'll be able to find them integrated on the motherboard. So we'll look at motherboards, go backwards a little bit, look at those. The video card will be your other big purchase. So pick out a good CPU and a good video card. You've got a decent amount of money to spend. It should also include Windows 10. So since if you're building your own system, maybe you can get a copy of Windows 10 elsewhere, or get a legitimate copy of it through the school or something like that. But if you're building a system and we're trying to compare apples to apples, you want to make sure that you are, anyway, including that. It's around 100 to 150, depending on whether you've got Windows 10 Pro or Windows 10 Home edition. The monitor is not included, but you can add on a price for a decent gaming monitor. I said 27, that was just kind of random. That's pretty big, but if you're gaming, a nice big monitor is nice, but that's not included in the main price of the computer. Keyboard, mouse, computer case. They come in different sizes, shapes, everything. Well, look at motherboard formats as well. We're typically, if you're building a full-size computer, I'll stop the share for just a second. If you're building a full-size computer, it's a good idea to use a full-size case. It gives you a little bit more room for expandability, adding extra hard drives. Some of the video cards can get fairly large, and a bigger case also helps to dissipate the heat better. I should bring mine in that I built at home. The last one I built at home is about the size of a large shoebox, and it's using a different format for the motherboard. So if you look at formats for motherboards, this is where you can have some choices come in. Let me see here.
Did you use micro ATX?
I'm actually trying to remember if it was micro or a mini ITX. I think it was a micro ATX. Yeah, so he's asking about the form factors, which we'll look at right now. So typical ATX form factor is the standard one. And unless you want to build a small computer, which I did, I was building this tiny computer. I didn't care too much about having room for lots and lots of hard drives in it. I kind of wanted to be compact. It was going to my daughter's room, and she didn't have a lot of room for a big tower case. It actually was my computer, but she ended up stealing it. And then she moved off to college, so I got my computer back again. And I used liquid cooling inside. So again, didn't have a ton of room for a real large heat sink on top of the CPU. So when you look at cooling solutions in the book, you've got options for liquid cooling or air cooling, and both of them work really well. So if you get a decent air cooler, it can work just as well as liquid cooling or close to it. Okay, so let's take a look here at motherboards. So the form factor was what we were just talking about. So you can see over here on the left hand, this is at Newegg, by the way. So I've already gone in and selected that I was looking at motherboards, and then made the choice of AMD just for fun. It looked like on the voting that you guys did the other day that more people were kind of leaning towards AMD, and either one works great. I don't think you can go wrong, especially if you figure out, okay, we've got $1,500 to spend. Maybe you want to spend $400 on a CPU or $500, whatever that is. At that price point, AMD and Intel, they're both pretty smart companies. They're going to have competing CPUs. They're going to be very similar in performance. So I chose AMD, and then you've got these other choices going down the side. So the socket type is going to be dependent on which CPU you choose. So you choose a CPU, and then you've got ways of kind of filtering out what motherboards you want. And also you can see on Newegg, and again, I don't own stock in Newegg, it's just that they've got a decent website, they've got nice pictures that you can look at. You can see that the AM4 has over 1,000 choices. It's the most popular socket type out there right now for AMD CPUs. You know, as the new ones come out, maybe they start needing a different style of socket type, you know, whatever, generationally that way. Manufacturer, there's lots and lots of different manufacturers out there. Oops. Asus is one of the biggest ones. I like Asus motherboards, but there's lots of them out there, Gigabyte as well. We don't care about that part. Down for pricing. Okay, so here you've got CPU type as well, but again, your processor is going to be dictating the socket type. And then you've got chipsets too. So in the book, this is back in chapter 3, but it talks about the chipset in the motherboard. It controls functions, and we've talked about this before as well. So the chipset can make a big difference. But again, typically, once you pick the CPU, you're going to have a couple, you know, maybe only one chipset available for that CPU if it's pretty new, or maybe a couple of them. I know with Intel, sometimes you have kind of the upper end chipset, and then you have the mid-range. You know, maybe the upper end one is for gaming, and it includes a lot of features and allows overclocking. And then maybe you have more of a business class chipset, which doesn't have as many features. So the chipset can make a difference. And again, you can kind of see the numbers here indicating which ones are most popular. Now we get down to form factor. This is what we're just talking about. ATX is still the kind of standard form factor. So if you get a full size, you know, I'm looking at the Dell computer here at my feet. That's one of the downsides to buying off the shelf, is that this Dell computer that's sitting here, it looks like it should be an ATX motherboard, but in class, when I have people open them up and kind of take a look and compare them, they discover, no, it's not quite an ATX. It's something else, kind of weird. So it's proprietary, and that means that I can't just replace this motherboard with something different very easily. That this case is designed to take the Dell motherboard. So it has an i7 7700K. So if I decided, hey, I want to, you know, make this into a little more of a gaming computer and have some other features, I couldn't just pop out that motherboard and pop in another one. So that's a kind of a downside to some of the proprietary designs. Okay, so these mini and micro ones here. So look at micro ATX. And you can see the form factor changes here on the screen. If you're looking at this, these are basically square. They're very small. If we zoom in on this, you know, if this is a stick of RAM right here, should be zooming in maybe. Let's give it, oh, double click. There we go. So if that's a stick of RAM that is about, they're standardized, fairly standardized. So, you know, if this is about 6 inches long, all right. So you can see that if that's a stick of RAM, then this is probably about 9 inches square. It gives the specs too. If you look in the specs, it'll tell you how. So a full-size ATX is quite a bit bigger, but these would be used for building small computers. This one has a fairly basic backplane, so the sound card and stuff like that. It supports HDMI. Looks like it's also got DisplayPort adapter. You know, this would be a good basic motherboard, but it's nothing too fancy, you know, but from looking at the connections, right? Let's get out of here. All right. So if you guys are shopping for motherboards, most of the time, if you're building a computer that's going to be used for gaming and these other things, and we're talking about having two full-size hard drives plus some type of SSD, then you're probably looking at the full-size ATX motherboard. So under form factor, you look at your full-size ATX, and you might want to look at some of the other features and you know, drill down a little bit more. So you've got, you know, onboard video. Does it support, what type of onboard video does it support? HDMI, that's, you know, almost all of them are going to have HDMI, but you can use this to start kind of filtering out stuff. Maybe you also want one that has DisplayPort. So if you apply both of those filters, it's really going to start narrowing down your search, right? And that's kind of what you want, is to filter stuff out. So here you can look, you can see pricing, is kind of all over the board, anywhere from $100 on up. Here's one for $319. That's a little more expensive. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but here you've got a good site to kind of do some research on motherboards. Here you can see this is a full-size ATX, so quite a bit bigger. It's hard to tell on the screen, but quite a bit bigger motherboard. When you buy the computer case, you're going to be getting a full-size, probably a mid-tower case, or whatever size you want. You can go crazy and get a great big case. I've got the computer that's in the back. We've got one hooked up to our 3D printer back there that's probably about, I don't know, it's giant. It's a huge case. So that's kind of fun. So here again, on the back plane, you can see it's got a few more connectors. Still not a ton. The sound card might be a little wimpy, so you might be looking at trying to find one that has a little bit better sound card in it, but it'll probably do the job just fine. So you can also buy add-on sound cards as well. So you could have something that would go into one of these add-on slots. Here you'll notice that you've got two PCI Express slots for your video cards, PCI Express X16. This one is a little bit different. I have to look in the specs, but probably this one has something, it's either faster or has higher voltage capability than this one. A lot of them are designed to be able to run two video cards at the same time. So you've got, what are the two technologies? SLI and Crossfire, you gamers out there. Do any of you have a system with two video cards in it? Yeah, personally, as a hardware person, but also not a hardcore gamer, even if I was a hardcore gamer, I would probably spend my money on one really good video card versus two video cards running in tandem. Although, there are certain systems that you can do that with, and the two video cards are then working together to produce a higher quality image with faster frame rates and stuff like that. But for simplicity's sake, I usually would probably recommend getting one video card and spending more money on it than buying one and then later on adding a second one, or some kind of scenario like that. So, okay. All right. So we can look back at the chapter on motherboards. One of the things that they have you looking at, and we do in class, but I don't necessarily recommend it for home, is upgrading the BIOS on your motherboard. So the firmware on the UEFI, let's call it a UEFI. Many of the UEFI, if you go into the firmware and go into the setup, has an option for upgrading the firmware, and I'm going to call it the BIOS, but upgrading it to newer firmware. And they'll refer to that as flashing the BIOS or flashing the firmware. You can do it from inside of Windows too. On the older computers, you had to boot them off of a USB or boot them off of a DVD that you'd burned, and it would have a little utility that would start up and rewrite the information on the UEFI or on the BIOS, and then put a new copy of firmware on it that might give you maybe the old one had some bugs or something like that. This is something you could possibly look at for your home computers, but the downside to it, we mentioned this in class before, the downside to it is if you've flashed your BIOS or flashed the RAM that holds it, and it uses special type of read-only memory. So it's an EEPROM, it's called. So you're able to flash upgrade it. If you've gone through the process halfway and something bad happens, that means that you've erased your BIOS or you've erased the firmware off of the UEFI, but you haven't yet had a chance to upload new stuff to it. And that means your computer is not probably going to boot up again. So this is one of those things where it's not proper English, but the old adage that says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Have you guys heard that? Ain't's not really a very proper sentence, right? But the old thing is like, yeah, if it ain't broken, don't try to fix it. Well, that certainly applies here. Although in class, with the classroom computers, I let students do this. And so we will look up the firmware that it currently has. We'll go to the Dell website, we'll use the service ID tag, and we'll look to see if there's a newer version out there. And if there is, we'll update them. And most of the time there's a little utility that you can download and you can run it from inside of Windows, which is actually pretty handy. And it executes and runs and it updates the firmware while the computer is running. Now, if the computer crashes or you got little kids or dogs running around, maybe they knock the cord out from the wall or accidentally. I actually did this one time. I was sitting at my desk, leaned back, stretching, and hit the power button on the power strip. The whole computer, crashes. Obviously, I don't know what I was working on, but I lost some sort of data. Whatever I was working, I hadn't saved it. But so be careful if you're trying to do that. If you're upgrading firmware, that's something that you can look at. Alana's saying liquid cooling all the way. Yeah, I like liquid cooling. It's gotten to a point where it is definitely pretty reliable. We had one in class that we put together a long time ago. I'll have to get a picture of it next time we're visiting. And it was an older system, and so we tested it ahead of time and had some leaks, and then had to readjust. The new ones come pre-filled. All the tubes are connected, so the chances of having a leak on the system initially are pretty minimal. But yeah, liquid cooling is nice. It doesn't take up much room. You do have to have room for the hoses and then the little radiator system that plugs into the case. And the case has to support it as well. There has to be a place to mount the radiator in the computer case for your liquid cooling. So all good things to be taking a look at here. While I'm thinking about this, I need to, all right, so I'm gonna edit this real quick here. All right, so our price that we agreed on was about $1,500. Is that right? Give or take. All right, your budget is, we'll put it in here, 1,500 plus or minus. Okay, also for you guys, I posted the quiz for the networking class. I'm going to probably post your quiz as well. So they'll both be posted, but I'm going to put it further. I'm going to put a date on there, just like I did for the networking class that's out there quite a ways. The reason for doing that is not everybody is in this class that's in the networking class. There's some overlap. It's not 100%. And also, if you finish one, or maybe you want to work on both, a little bit at a time, that'll give you the flexibility to do that. So I'm putting the due dates for them pretty far out in the future. So don't procrastinate is my other moral of the story. Try to work on them a little bit at a time. It's not posted yet. Same thing with the computer build assignment. It's out there, but that one's not a huge priority, but be thinking about it as we're going through these next chapters. We'll be talking about hard drives and other storage devices, input-output devices. They're all going to kind of add up to what you need to put together a whole computer. And let me see here, this one's, okay, here's a good picture of it. So when we get into the hard drive chapter, just so if you're shopping for kind of CPUs and motherboards right now, one of the things you might see on the motherboards is that they support these M.2 solid state drives. So a solid state drive, if you can still see my screen, is, it could look like this. It could look like a small, laptop drive, essentially 2.5-inch drive, or they can be mounted to the motherboard. So if you can see this picture here, this is a hard drive. So it's a flat stick, flat circuit board. It looks a lot like a stick of RAM because that's essentially what it is. It's just that the RAM is a different type of RAM than volatile memory. Memory that's the normal, DDR, whatever you've got, memory is volatile, which means that as soon as it loses power, any information that's stored in this stick of RAM is gone. Whereas an SSD, a solid state drive, uses non-volatile memory. It's able to obviously store data, so similar to a USB flash drive, that sort of thing. But this mounts in, so it's got an edge connector. So here's your M.2 format. So here is, if you can see where my mouse is, here's the edge connector that actually transfers the data back and forth to the motherboard. And then it's got your chips along here and a controller. And then this end with the little half moon shape, that is for the set screw there. Now these do come in different lengths, which is makes buying them a little bit more difficult. The ones for the motherboards are typically the longer format. I was working on a laptop for a person. I they bought a new laptop. They gave me this old laptop. I was going to fix it for them and give it back to them, but the M.2 that it had was a little short, stubby one, and I had to look up the part number. And there was another one that was just a little bit longer. So you do have to be careful if you're ordering replacement parts for things like a laptop and stuff like that, that you get the right format for the M.2 drive. So you can see you've got some good pictures of them here. So they come in. They also referred to as NVM drives. So there's a little bit more complication if you're trying to spec them out. But again, typically if you're buying a motherboard, it'll list what types of formats that it wants. If you're replacing one, like in a laptop, you know, it'll have a sticker, or you can look up the brand. In this case, it was a Samsung laptop pulled off the back of it. I should bring that in and show you that as well. It was easy to get to. Unlike those Apple computers, same friend wants me to help him replace the battery in his Apple MacBook. And those are a little bit more difficult to get apart than a PC type laptop. And the battery is basically glued into the inside of the laptop in kind of separate pieces. I'll take some pictures when we get around to doing that, as opposed to us, you know, most of your standard PCs where the battery comes out as a module, easy to get in and out, that kind of thing. So, all right. Well, I guess we don't need to go back that far. Okay, so as we're moving ahead here, be watching for your next quiz. It'll be out in the future. You know, the due date will be out in the future, but my recommendation is not to procrastinate. We have Veterans Day tomorrow. I think I announced that to the last class. I try to put that under announcements as well. So these are under these. I'm posting all of the recordings. Students that miss class or whatever, for whatever reason, I post these. They don't get, there's not a lot of people watching them, which is great. If you're watching us in real time and participating, that's even better. But just as a reminder, we don't have school tomorrow. So if you were, you know, planning on logging in, don't worry about it. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so the two things we have outstanding, you'll have a quiz coming up, and then this computer build. I put that out, you know, due beginning of next month, which is coming up, but it's out there a little ways. So be thinking about that, you know, in terms of, you know, parts and pieces. A couple of you mentioned PC Part Picker as well. This is a good website where you can go through and, you know, it actually gives you some sample builds as well. If you haven't seen this is a pretty good website to kind of go through. Other people are submitting computers that they've built. You know, they've taken the time to kind of research, you know, all the parts and all that kind of stuff. So you can get some good ideas from this as well. So here's a gaming PC that's, you know, and they have the price in here, $1,500. So this would be a good website to look at if you haven't put a computer together, just in terms of what other people are doing. They give you the full price list and all that kind of stuff. You can use these as guidelines. I'd recommend trying to pick out your own stuff, you know, trying to go in and see what the differences are between the different components and stuff like that. But this is a great resource. And if you're looking at their system builder here, you can walk through, and it walks you through each step. So the first one is the same one we're choosing. Choose a CPU, gives you a bunch of choices there, gives you the prices of them. You know, you can play around with this for a little while. Please don't just try to copy your, I've had students do that, where basically they printed out their shopping cart from this website. So try to, you know, you're going to be typing it up on your own, make a little business letter of it, but you can certainly use this as a way to pick out the parts. If you were building this in real life, this is actually a really good thing too. Up in the corner up here, you'll notice that it's got the wattage as well. So as you start picking components, it's going to add up how much power they use. And one of your big power suckers is going to be your video card. And that's going to determine the need for a certain size power supply, which is actually later in the book. But choosing a power supply that powers everything is good. You don't need to go overboard, but keep in mind, if you buy a 700 watt power supply, it doesn't use 700 watts all the time. It's just capable of putting out that much power. So it's better to give yourself a little bit of room for growth in terms of it. But this is cool up here on this website. It's got this adds up your power bill essentially. So you can say add there. Let's see here. CPU cooler. I'm just picking these at random here. Motherboard. All right, so you can see my my power is up to 190 watts already, and I haven't even chosen the video card yet. So, all right. How are you guys doing in your reading and stuff like that? Are you kind of up to speed so far? Doing okay? Okay, good. So I know we kind of had a little break from the last week, but hopefully you guys were still reading the book a little bit. It's a little bit harder to do some of the activities, but you can do some of them at home. We've been making, you made your flash drives that were bootable, so maybe you've been able to play with those a little bit. We'll kind of bring those back a little bit for our troubleshooting section. So hopefully you still got some blank flash drives, or the ones that you've made would be good. And then for this class too, do most of you have, I know it was mostly for the networking class, but do most of you have something running in Hyper-V for this class as well that you can play with? Okay. And the reason I asked that is in the software class, kind of in both, but in the software class, we looked at doing regedit. So the activities in the book had you looking at regedit. And then we also were Googling that. So I might post that up on the discussion board as well for Canvas. But if it doesn't get up there, remember we Googled for something like cool regedit or registry hacks or tweaks or whatever they call it. Here, I'll share this real quick. It's in the chat room there. All right. So that's another thing you could be playing around with. But again, I mentioned that you should probably be doing that in Hyper-V. If you choose to do it on your host system, if you're careful, you'll probably be fine if you're following some pretty explicit instructions. So here's the How-To Geek, the 10 best registry hacks for Windows 10. So here's where you can go in and make some small changes to the operating system that you wouldn't be able to make through the control panel. So we talked about this a few days ago. This is another little sideline. So if you guys are interested in this stuff, these are the kind of things you can do at home without hurting anything. But especially true if you're doing this inside of Hyper-V, that you won't be messing stuff up and hurting your computer. Because potentially, as the book mentions, when you make a change to the registry, it happens instantly. And that's when you'd have maybe a restore point to go back to. Hopefully you guys, if you type in restore points on your system, that you have system restore points enabled, that system protection and system restore is configured on your system. I have it set up where it's on the C drive, but not for the other backup drives. So at any rate, those are things we've kind of been talking about, and they could be stuff that you're setting up and working on at home. Let's see, add apps to your, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. Most of these are small little tweaks. They're not major changes, obviously, because you're not going to want to change Windows 100%. So most of these little registry tweaks are just little small things. Adding the seconds, so you have like a clock, adding the seconds to the clock. Maybe that's useful to you, or if you don't want to see if it works, right? This would be a cool one where if you're doing a registry edit, you'll see that it takes place, visually, you get a cue right there that it's working. It's on your taskbar, obviously where the clock is. That would be a good one to take a look at. So if you click on the link here, it's showing you how to run regedit, starts you from the beginning, shows you where you go into, and then the registry is organized hierarchically. So sometimes you'll get instructions that'll say advanced / this / that / that. So you go into your registry and then drill down until you find the key value. And then some of them you're just changing a value from 0 to 1, or you're adding a value. They're usually fairly easy to do. This one is also saying that they can download our one-click registry hack. Please don't do that. You know, for one thing, you're not learning anything to just click on a button and have it do it for you. And you're also like, it just makes me give me a little bit of the willies, like, oh, you're letting somebody else run a program that's going to edit your registry. So if you're going to do the reg edit thing from the software class, make sure you're following some instructions, go through it, pick something that's relatively straightforward, that's easy to see for the change, and that's something you can work on at home as well over the little bit of a break. I'll try to stay in better touch. Last week I kind of didn't post a lot to Canvas or anything. There was so much going on. You know, we had advising day, and then I wasn't here on Wednesday, and then there was all the election stuff going on. So I didn't really give you guys a ton of stuff to do or to kind of keep you busy. Although with Canvas, we'll start kind of using it better in addition to your quizzes to have you guys working on some stuff. So that should be. How many of you are staying in touch on Discord? A few of you using Discord? Okay. For next quarter, looking ahead, that's a really good resource. I know